All right.
Feel good?
Mic check,
Yeah.
test 1, 2.
Let's do it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Zach and Caleb Show. I'm Caleb, this is Zach,
Hey, what's up, guys?
and we have the lovely Sophie Tobert here with us today.
Hello.
Sophie, thank you so much for coming down. Sophie and I have been friends for a couple of years now. We met through a mutual friend. You were doing YWAM at the time, and you just kind of have a crazy story, so that's why we have you on the podcast today. So if you just want to give a quick life recap.
Quick life
Wow.
recap.
I think I want to hear, like, you have a cool testimony and then kind of how you took saying yes to Jesus, and it's just been kind of going hard ever since, I guess, in my estimation. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm Sophie. I met Caleb like probably 4 years ago, through a mutual friend from YWAM. Shout out Anna Hansen.
Yeah, shout out Anna, who's actually been on the
Oh, not
Jesus
Anna
Said a
Hansen
Dream.
anymore.
Oh,
Anna Shipman.
yeah.
Sorry.
My bad, Anna. But yeah, she was on the Jesus Said a Dream podcast with us, so we heard her story a little bit too.
Yeah, awesome. But yeah, I met Anna in YWAM. We went to Kona together, so that was awesome. And then she introduced me to Caleb. So but my story is it's a lot of different kind of things, a lot of adventure, I would say, in my life. But it didn't start out that way necessarily. So I grew up in La Crosse, Wisconsin, like 2.5 hours from here. And I grew up going to church with my family. We were all pretty involved in the church. And kind of just like did the thing growing up, like went to church every Sunday and like definitely like wore that on the outside. But I would say internally, like I definitely did not have a personal relationship with God. I never read my Bible, really. I never prayed other than like before dinner with my parents. And my life was pretty like average, I would say, as a white American growing up. Pretty like safe and just like a sheltered life, I would say, which I'm grateful for. I had a really good childhood. I'm very close with my sisters and my parents. But I would say like the biggest turning point in my faith journey was probably, or like kind of the start of it was probably my freshman year of college. I had never lived away from home before. I was super out of my comfort zone, and it really was hard for me to adjust to life in college. And I became pretty depressed. I saw everyone like going out and partying, and I thought I needed to join a sorority to have friends, and just was feeling so empty because everything that I had filled myself with of like friends in high school and just busyness kind of was gone now, and I had to like start from the ground up. And so I was pretty lost, I would say. I was crying all the time, didn't really have many friends. I remember like there would be multiple weekends where I just would do homework because I like just wanted to fill my time with something, and I didn't want to go out and meet friends that way. So that was probably a pretty low point for me. And then I ended up meeting a girl who had just gotten back from something called YWAM, which is Youth with a Mission. It's a missions organization, and she just had this such a amazing spirit about her. She was so full of joy, and she knew no one. She like just was so giddy all the time, I remember. She like never went out either. And so I was like, there's just something different about her. And so I got to know her. Her name's Bryn. She's one of my best friends still. And she had just gotten back from doing missions in the Middle East with YWAM. And she and I became very close. And she started talking to me about all of her adventures in the Middle East. And just like I started to spend my evenings with her, and we would just like watch movies together. We got really close really fast. And then eventually, later that year, I decided through prayer with her and kind of like getting integrated into college ministry with her and like church life with her, I decided to do YWAM. And so I took a break my sophomore year of college, and I ended up going to Kona, Hawaii to do a discipleship training school. And that's where my life like completely just flipped upside down. I mean, God just completely wrecked me. And like I said before, like I got there and immediately day one, they were like, we're going to pray over each other. Like I was like, oh no, like I've never prayed out loud in my life. And I was terrified. I was so scared. I even remember the night before leaving to go to YWAM, I didn't sleep at all. I just was so anxious. I was like, why am I doing this? Even though like deep down I really did want to go, I was so scared because I had never been away from home and I was really struggling in college. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I'm going to go do this thing. Like I really felt peace about it, but I didn't even know God. And I didn't know where that peace came from. But it was something new that I hadn't experienced before. So I was like, I'm going to say yes. But it definitely was like a leap of faith. And so I went, I knew no one. I met Anna in the airport, which was a blessing, but yeah, and just completely like I started praying. I started learning how to read the Bible. I just started spending time with God every morning. I would wake up at 6 a.m. And it was like there was so much grace on that. Like I didn't even try really. I just like I don't know what it was. It was like a fast track. And obviously like the community and yeah, just like the training that we would get in our classes, like it just was so fruitful for me. And so that's where I really, like my relationship with the Lord really changed and my heart really began to tenderize. And I began to just learn so much, like so many seeds were planted in my heart. And honestly, like that is only attributed to like the Holy Spirit. Like I don't know how else to describe it. It really wasn't in my own doing. And after YWAM, I came back home. That was at my sophomore year of college. To finish.
Wait, where'd you go in YWAM on
Oh
your
yeah,
mission?
I went to Mexico with 13 girls. It was kind of a mishmash group because we ended up all getting COVID, and so we couldn't go to our original outreach locations. So I went to Mexico, did missions there for like 2 months, I think, and that was incredible too. I remember one of my favorite things that we did is we went to like the city dump, and it was like this massive mound of just garbage, and like we had to wear, I remember like masks, and we had to cover all of our limbs because there was toxic waste like burning up as we drove up this mountain of garbage just from like the heat of the sun. And so we saw people literally had like carve outs in this garbage, and like that was their house. Like they had taken like sofas and chairs, I remember, and like tables literally just like in this like flat part and like carved out walls, and it was crazy. And I had seen like kids who looked like they'd never had a shower, and just like yeah, it was really really hard to see some things that we saw in Mexico. And yeah, I just got to like be activated in ministry. And so we would pray for people. We often gave people just like food and water and asked them about God. I remember just like being challenged too in my own beliefs and like what I like was seeing too. And we even like witnessed some healings, which was crazy. And so I would say, yeah, outreach like definitely like solidified the things I was learning in Kona in my heart in a really awesome way. So yeah, that was kind of my YWAM season. And I was thinking about coming home, thinking I really wanted to stay on that mountaintop kind of, but I decided I wanted to come home and finish school. And that was not an easy decision to make, but it did feel right at the time. So I came home to Minnesota. That's when I met Caleb through Anna. And Anna also got me plugged into a church called Everyday here in Minneapolis, which has been an amazing church community for me. And I've been there ever since. But I finished school. That transition was very difficult, probably another lower point in my life, but also I think I almost like God allowed me to experience it so that I could like I've grown so much in like a more organic, like not necessarily like this exponential, like I don't know, super fast experience like YWAM, but it's been a journey for the last now 4 years, 4 years since then, of like living my everyday life with Jesus, not being in this like secluded almost bubble of like ministry and community that literally felt like Eden at times. It's been hard in a lot of ways. And so I'm grateful to have come home and made that decision because I really believe the Lord like has just matured me spiritually in a lot of ways through it. And so I have been home. I finished my degree May 2023, so a little over a year ago. And I then after school decided to be a part of this mountain guiding ministry with Young Life. It's called Beyond Malibu. And the fall before my graduation, I really felt the Lord like asking me to go on this kind of crazy adventure with him. And at first I was like, this doesn't make any sense with the timeline of things. And I had a full-time job lined up after school. And I was like, this is a 2-year commitment. This is a ton of money and investment. I have no mountain guiding skills.
Yeah, explain what it is.
Yeah. So Beyond Malibu is an adventure ministry, a camp that's up in British Columbia in Canada in the mountains. It's like a little camp that's nestled in this beautiful inlet. It's called the Princess Louisa Inlet. And we take Young Life areas from all over the country on 8-day backpacking trips every single week. So I was a part of a team of guides. There was I think there was like 20 of us guides who lead these trips and do everything. We cook, we like clean up the poop bags, and we like guide through trails. We have to know all the equipment. We do rappels and are summiting these like we're climbing from sea level to like 9,000 feet in literally 4 days and then back down. And it's super like off the grid. I didn't have any phone connection for 3 months, like the summer. And you're just living at this little base camp in this inlet. And it's an amazing time. Like it's the most beautiful place on earth.
Where was it located again?
British Columbia, Canada.
Okay,
yeah. So it's literally like this inlet and like you're literally like in the ocean, but on either side, it's just these like, it just immediately like shoots up in mountains. It's incredible. And I had heard about the ministry through a friend. I was involved in Young Life in college, and then had heard about like the more adventure ministry. It's totally different than like a normal summer camp. It's not a normal summer camp by any means because the campers come on boats and then immediately the next day we're in the mountains for a week. And so
and it's not like a summer camp where there's like a ton of cabins and like a mess hole. It's like you're literally cooking your own food and surviving in the wilderness.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'd heard about the ministry and I was like just kind of thinking and praying that fall. And I was like, I kind of want to do this. I mean, I like hiking, but I'm from the Midwest. Like I've been to the mountains too a couple times, but like I had never done anything to this scale. Like we call it soft mountaineering. It's not like we're climbing Mount Everest, but like we're using ice axes. We're teaching kids how to self-arrest. I've had like some near death experiences for sure. And so, yeah, we're using like hardcore equipment. And I mean, I was like, God, I do not know what this is. Like, I don't know why I want to do this, but I feel you drawing me to it. And I think I'm going to take a leap of faith and say yes. So, yeah, so I did it. And that's a whole other can of worms that
Yeah,
we
we'll
can
get to that in
into.
a second. So then come back to, you came back home after the first summer.
Yep. So I came back home after my first summer. Again, kind of like just a lot of whiplash, I feel like internally. It was pretty hard, especially after being off the grid. I remember my family went to visit my extended family in Canada, and we were at the mall one day, and I couldn't do it. There were so many lights, there was so much noise, so many smells. Like I was way overstimulated. And I remember I went into the bathroom. We were about to go walk into the movie theater, and I think we walked into the theater, and I couldn't even watch this movie. It was like way too much stimulation, and I just went to the bathroom and just like I remember when I came back from the first summer, I had to like often just like plug my ears and listen to myself breathe because it was just so much stimulation. So, yeah, that was like a very different transition than YWAM was from coming back home from YWAM. But again, just the Lord like with me every step of the way and teaching me to trust in Him through those rough times too. And I started my job right away, moved into a new house with friends from college, and just like completely went into my tech consulting job and was on the computer 9 hours a day. Every day. And that was, just another journey that God had me on. I ended up staying at my job for that year, and I was kind of like, oh gosh, I have this commitment to go back to mountain guiding next summer. Like, what am I gonna do? God, like, can you help me here? And I remember like back and forth going in my mind, like, I want this job, but I don't love it, and so maybe I should just quit and like be done. But then I didn't feel peace about that, so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to see if they'll let me go on, because my job didn't know about this. My job didn't know that I had a 2-summer commitment at all. So I started the job, worked through the fall, and then January comes around. I'm like, okay, we have trainings in 2 months. Like, I got to get going on like what my plan is here. And I ended up just being like, I'm going to see if they'll give me a leave of absence. And I talked to my boss, my executive director, and that was a scary conversation, but he was pretty open to it. He's like, I'm going to do whatever I can to support you in this. But that was so unlikely, you guys. Like I literally, he was like, he couldn't even approve a leave of absence for me because I wasn't even eligible for. I worked at a big firm, and so there's like a lot of procedures and processes in place, and I wasn't eligible for a leave of absence because I hadn't worked at the firm for more than a year. And so he was like, I don't know if we'll be able to get this approved. Like, he couldn't even approve it. They had to make an exception for me, but usually the exception is like if I'm studying to take the CPA. Like, it made no sense. And so he's like, you know what, I'm going to do everything I can to work with you on this. So I wrote up a page of what the ministry is, why I believe it will like not take away from my work, but actually like supplement it and help me become a better employee, which I definitely think it did. And like why it's like one of the most important things to me. And I ended up giving him this sheet of paper, and he escalated that up to this guy who was like the head of like the Central America region of my firm. And he was like, I don't have a lot of hope for you, honestly. Like, I do not think this is going to get approved. I've never seen this happen in my 20 years of being here. And then I come back like 2 weeks later, and he's like, it got approved. And I was like, thank you, Jesus. I had I was like, if it doesn't get approved, I'm just going to quit. But anyways, so it got approved. And then I went back for my next summer, and that was amazing too. and totally life-changing those 2 summers. And then I came back here this fall. I was working at the same firm, and then this last Friday was actually my last day. So I just recently quit my job, which is just the next step that I'm taking. I'm kind of moving on.
Yeah, tell us why you're quitting your job.
Yeah, I don't really know what's next. There's a lot of reasons I think I'm quitting my job, but I worked in consulting, looking at like IT systems for companies. And it was, an amazing first job, I would say. Like, I got really great experience, definitely like very technical, huge companies, like very established firm that I worked for. And, just massive companies would come to us, but also like smaller companies. And so I felt like I got some really good professional experience, and I'm really grateful for it. But I didn't love the work. I didn't really like sitting behind a computer all day. And I felt like I wasn't growing in ways that I wanted to be growing in and learning things that I was interested in. And so this was kind of a new decision for me to make. Like in the past, I felt like God like had really like ushered me and been like, hey, what about like giving me this idea, or just like made doors open up and doors close. But this one, it was kind of like, you can kind of choose. I didn't ever feel him say like, it's the job that's bad, like you need to quit your job. It's the job's fault. And like internally I was like, oh, it's like, I don't like this work. But I never felt like God was like, I don't know. I never felt like he was like, yes, quit your job. I felt like he really opened up the decision for me to make on my own. And so just kind of have been growing, I feel like, a lot in maturity in that. And so I decided, I'm like, I don't really know what's next. I don't know what I want to do next. I'm really grateful for this job and for the people and what I've learned, but I'm ready to move on to something new. So to be continued. We'll see.
Continued. And here we are, the Monday after you quit your
Yes.
job, and you don't have anything lined up as of the moment.
No.
You're just trusting.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sweet. Well, thanks for recapping all of that for us. No, that's good. I think it gives, I appreciate it, because I think it gives context to who you are and how you live your life and all of that stuff. But before I ask any questions, did you have anything?
Oh, I've got
Yeah.
some ideas.
Yeah.
So
Okay, good.
let's jump into
Me
it.
too.
Yeah, so this gets me thinking about, I just came back from a weekend where I did some filming for a dance routine that raises awareness for human trafficking, and they do fundraising for all this stuff. And it's, I don't know, human trafficking problem, absolutely huge, very, very dark, whole nother podcast topic. But what I walked away from also learning, like a thing I took away inwardly, is talking with all the people there. Amazing people, extremely self-sacrificing, and everything they do is scary. But you look at all those people and they're like, we're taking on the challenge, right? And it's very inspiring. So I was talking with one of the people who's actually from my church that flew down to help out, and she's continuing down more training so that she can be a better person to do all this stuff. And she always goes on everything that they have that she can join with. And so I asked her, I was like, were you afraid like the first time? And are you afraid the second time and the third time? And she said, every single time I'm afraid. And I think I want to like stay comfortable. I don't want to do this in that moment, like right before, right? But she's like, I'm being obedient to the Lord, because she said the first time I said, that's not me. I'm the person. I'll pray for you. I'll be the support person. And then she just couldn't sleep. And she said, it was so funny. She just woke up like after 3 nights of no sleep, and she's like, God, just tell me what it is. I want to go to sleep. Like, it was just so funny. And then she just knew that it was like, I need to go on this trip. So then she ran into somebody like the next day, and they were like, or she called somebody and they're like, oh, I was about to call you to tell you that God told me that you have to go on this trip. So it was like, the confirmation was awesome. But she said that every time she goes and every time she like moves past that fear, takes that steps into that responsibility, it's not like, oh man, that sucked, but I got to be obedient to God. It wasn't like that. She said, I'm always like impressed with myself that I can handle it. And I think so, like what I walked away from, because I was feeling the same way about the trip because I had to pack all my gear and fly and all this stuff. And I was like, part of me just wants to retreat, stay comfortable, call it off, be like, it's too last minute. I can't make it down. But then like, I went and I was so glad I went, had an awesome experience. And I kind of had this small like revelation that I felt like God was telling me, like, when I ask people to do something, it will always feel scary, but it's because I'm asking you to do something you're uncomfortable with, but it's because I know you can do it and you're going to be impressed with yourself that you can do it. But he's like, but I knew you could do it all along. And that's why I'm asking you to step up and do it. And that was like the thought when you're talking about mountaineering, you're like, I've never been a mountain guide. And it's like, but it was awesome and I survived, like all this stuff. And it wasn't like this disaster. And you're like, why did God even call me here? Like, oh my goodness, everything went wrong. And so, yeah, it just kind of like, I think people have this idea that God's going to call them into something so outside of like who they are, that it has this feeling of like when you're in school and you don't make eye contact with the teacher because like they're gonna make me do the worst thing ever and I don't want to be the one to clean the tables, whatever. And it's like that's kind of like I think a lot of people see how God like picks people to go and do stuff. But how I was like looking at it this weekend, I was like, God picks people that he can handle it. And he's just calling them up to step in and be like, hey, if you're working with me, I'm going to like pave the way and empower you. And it's not going to be something, it might be something you'd never expected, but it's something that God knows you're capable of doing. All of that to say, I think I would love to hear your thoughts on comparing that mountaineering experience, the YWAM experience, with that moment that you said in college where it was like you stepped out, into a new experience and you were feeling, depressed and isolated. And there's a term that I've been thinking about a lot that's collapsing inwardly. And I think that's something that I feel like I fight on a regular basis, of that feeling to just like retract from things. And it's like, okay, I'm done being brave. Can I just, be comfortable? And it's like, especially when it comes to serving the Lord and always trying to be, can I just not read my Bible today? That like retreat feeling. And so I'd love to hear if that prompts any thoughts of like where you were in that space of feeling, I don't know, probably that same, like you just retreated and you're like, can I just be somewhere safe and comfortable? And I don't want to like push myself anywhere. And then to swing around the other way and you've pushed yourself in ways that so many people, even who've lived a full life experience, would go, I wouldn't want to push or I've never pushed myself to like that extent. So yeah, I'd love to hear if you had any thoughts on that.
That's so good. That's so good, Zach. Yeah, I think the first thought that comes to mind is in those moments where I've been like seeing something on the horizon and I'm like, ooh, I have this like inkling or idea or this like thing, honestly, like this thing that God's asking me to do deep down in my gut, and I feel it. And I feel the like fear, and I like am able to recognize that. I think my mind, what happens is like the thought of, I think it would be scarier right now if I didn't try and I didn't go and I didn't like. The scarier thought to me has always been like, man, I really hope I'm not the same person that I am today in 20 years. And like, what decision, what like track can I take right now that would lead to more faith, to more, just more forming into Jesus. And like, that's where my mind goes. And like, what I've learned too is I love what you said too about just like we often feel so unqualified. Like I think of Moses, when God calls Moses, it's like he just gives excuse after excuse. He's like, no, I'm not a good speaker. I can't do this. Like, but he gives us exactly what we need. He is our strength. And like when he's calling us into something new and challenging and that requires faith and bravery, it is such a good chance to just get to know God's heart and understand who he is and rely on him and trust him. And it's going to be scary because you're not trusting yourself. You're not in control. But that's kind of the whole point of faith, I guess, is kind of where my mind goes. But I loved what you said too about he always gives us what, or he never gives us something that we can't handle. Like he always like gives out assignments so perfectly. And something I think about in my mountain guiding, I think my first summer, like I really struggled actually with being like having a lot of thoughts of like, oh man, everything. It was like I was drinking from a fire hose every day. I was so scared. I was like, I have to take care of these like 12, 15-year-olds who are like falling over on their faces and like getting cut up and beat up and literally climbing a mountain with like 40 pounds on their back. Like this is terrifying. And there was so many moments that I wanted to retreat in myself, but I genuinely like couldn't. I had so many sleepless nights in the mountains and just like the thoughts of like bears and like, I don't know, like even just there's like thoughts of like we have to be trained in like making sure kids don't like come on these trips just to commit suicide or something, and like mental health problems. And we're not only like climbing a mountain, but we're sharing our life stories and having Bible studies and conversations. So there's like so many parts of the trips that I remember like after the summer, I just came home and I just was like, oh my gosh, there was no time while I was there to like fully understand what just happened. But I came home and I remember the first summer I was like, did I hear God right? Like that was really hard. And like I felt so unqualified the whole time. And I remember having a conversation with my roommate. I just was crying with her at the kitchen table. And I was like, Riley, I don't know if I heard God right. Like that was really hard. And none of it like that I can remember right now feels good, even though there was so much good and fruit from the summer. But she just was like, I want you to consider that God has another half of the story for you waiting for the next summer. And I'll never forget that conversation. Because it really empowered me, because I was like, I don't really want to go back. Like I have this job now. I can just stay home. I can be comfortable. Like it would be so much easier if I didn't have to go back right now. I don't want to have to deal with a leave of absence or quitting my job. I didn't like that. Like that was not fun for me. It was really hard. My body's tired. I'm mentally drained. Didn't get to, I don't know, I didn't really get to see the fruit of it. And then I went back the second summer, and that is a whole other amazing, amazing testimony of just God's faithfulness and showing up in like blessing me with showing kind of like the fruit of all that he was teaching me the first summer. So I mean, God is so faithful. He's never going to leave us. He's always by our side. And like he promises us that he will walk through the tough waters with us, and he will like that's something I'm learning time and time again is like when I like so often want to just be like, Jesus, can we just stay like comfortable? Can we just stay in one place at once? I feel like I'm like running up and trying to catch up behind you. And he often is like, no, because I know you can do this. Like, I know you can do this. And I know, I know that I've called you into something greater and something new. And I'm forming you into my likeness. So, I mean, it's not easy, but I just trusting and like, honestly, prayer has been a huge part of my journey too. Just like really trusting God in prayer. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
That was a great answer. Thank you.
That was really good. I want to explore something you were just obviously your whole point there of, I think sometimes we as humans, obviously, like you were saying, Zach, want to be comfortable, want it to be easy. And something I've had this same conversation a couple times in the past couple of weeks with a couple different people where they say the phrase, but it's hard. And it feels like that is a reason enough for us a lot of the time to not do something, like because it's hard. And I think especially because, where we live right now in this point of time in history is things don't have to be hard. Like we have
Yeah.
technology, we have an abundance of food, we have obviously everybody's story is different, but you kind of have to try to like make life hard. Um and yeah, that's not the right way to put it because
think-
everybody has struggles and
I think the
everybody
way to
has
say it is there is an easy alternative to almost everything.
yes.
now. Yeah.
Okay. That's a good way to put it. Because yeah, everybody has their own internal struggles and things that they're going through and relationships and finances and all of that stuff. But I think kind of the category I'm talking about here right now is like when you say yes to God and it is to quit school and go to Hawaii or pause school, ask for that, leave of absence, even though the odds are stacked against you, right? Starting a studio, starting a nonprofit, like, and it doesn't have to be that big and dramatic, but there are like forks in the road that we have that you're right. It's an alternative. It's like I can just keep going and doing what I've always done because it's familiar and known. And even if it's hard, at least I know how to handle it. That's maybe the best way to put it. Of I'm coping, like I'm surviving. And if I go down this other road, who knows what could happen, and the hard X factor is about to increase. And anyways, all of that to say, I think there's such a beauty in like hearing you talk and what I've experienced in my own life. And you hear stories all the time that inspire you of when people choose the hard thing and they come out on the other side, how beautiful that is and how inspiring that is and how people grow and change. And what I love about that first half of the story is you came out on the other side, you obeyed the Lord, you went out into the mountains, you had these experiences, but you didn't immediately have that. And it was worth it. Like 10 out of 10 would do again, because I don't think that always happens. Like that just makes me think of Joseph, where he gets thrown in the pit. And when he gets taken out of the pit, it's not 10 out of 10 would do again. It's, oh, now I'm getting sold into slavery. Dang, this sucks. And then he's sold in slavery. And it's like, okay, but now I'm like second command of this house. I'm living well. Like my master trusts me. And then all of a sudden that's taken away. And I'm sure he wasn't going at that point in the story. Like I can see the fruit. I like how you put that of like, of course there was fruit. It was just hard to see in that moment. And then he goes to prison. Same thing. He gets forgotten about. And now he's in the palace. And, I think that's so true for our lives. I think obviously all of that was kind of thrust upon Joseph, but for you and for us and for a lot of people, I think there is a moment where we get to choose the hard thing and how rewarding that is. Because I think on the other side of it, you do have this feeling coming all the way back to your point, Zach, of like, I am capable of doing this. I know some people might listen to this and be like, or hear you say like God doesn't give us anything harder than we can handle, or like you shouldn't be like proud of yourself because it's all God. And it's like, yes, it is. But what we also know about God is like we have the capability of saying yes or no to him. And I think it is a very admirable and honoring thing to go, I'm going to take the yes route, even if it means I'm sacrificing my comfort or an easy alternative. And I think that's how we get the best stories too. And I think that's how we grow and how God's kingdom expands is, the church is built on the backs of martyrs, right?
Mhm.
They could have recanted their faith. They could have been quiet. They could have done all of their gatherings in secret. But there was a moment in time where they had to be like, no, this is worth more than those things. And I think you would say now, and maybe I want to hear your perspective on this. Not maybe, I do want to hear your perspective on this if you have one of, no, I lost my train of thought because I messed up what I was saying. Oh,
Talking about martyrs.
Martyrs.
Choosing
Choosing
to
the hard
sacrifice.
Choosing
things.
the hard thing. I'm bad at my job now. Anyways, yeah, I guess if you have any perspective on what I was just saying, I don't have the specific question in mind anymore.
That's
Bummer.
okay.
Maybe it'll come back to me.
No, yeah, I think that's really good. I think like especially working in corporate America too, going from this like rich, deep community in the mountains, everyone's off the grid, everyone's like doing life together, encouraging each other all the time. And we're like growing in so many ways and seeing each other like come back from the mountains, and just an amazing community. And then being kind of thrust into like corporate America, like sitting in an office, working with people that don't know God, was really interesting, like really, really interesting. And I think something that I like that was coming to mind as you were talking is just like how asleep or like numb people can get to like what true life is, and how like just in Western America nowadays it's like we don't have to rely on God, and even things like fasting and like just fasting, prayer, like being uncomfortable, having uncomfortable conversations can like really push us to just like becoming something more, like feeding the hunger inside of us with God, instead of all the things that we're surrounded by, all the distractions that we're surrounded by. And I don't know, that thought was just coming to mind as you were talking about like so many people just choose to like numb themselves, I think, with what they think life is. But it's really not true life. And that's something I like got to see both worlds of that when I was coming back from the mountains. So it's true what you're saying. I agree with you. But
I've got a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel like your experience from the mountains, you had to just table or like say, well, okay, that was then, this is now, or like that was the old me, this is like I'm going to adapt now? Because I think it's funny that the mountain experience was it like labeled actually as like a camp or something like that, or a summer camp, but essentially it was just making the connections like a lot of people do a Christian summer camp and they have these amazing experiences with the Lord and their faith, and they grow, and then they come back, especially with students, and they come back to school and they go, that was me in the summertime, this is me now. And they kind of just shove all that into the past and just jump right back to who they were, because that's like they pick up where they left off, and in like a bad way. Did you ever experience that, or like have to fight against that, taking like that mountain experience and then going, oh, I'm going to bring that into my work now? Or is it like, there's no place for that at this work, and I'm just going to revert back to the regular, like pre-mountain experience person, you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think yes and no. I think both. I don't know. I would say it's definitely a battle. It's been a journey to
I will say it can include like the YWAM experience
Yeah,
and that
that
experience
too.
stuff too, because that's
for
any
sure.
mission trip is life changing. So I guess,
Yeah.
the question is like, was it hard to have that life change like exist because you were a changed person now? But yeah.
Yeah, I would say especially in YWAM, I experienced that, where I was like, I came home and I just was shocked. I remember I was on the bus going to class one day. I think it was our first day of classes, and I had been home like already 2 months from YWAM. And I came home, I was on the bus, and I saw everyone had their headphones in and was just like plugged in on their phones. And I was coming from Mexico doing ministry, but I had been home all summer. So I was home for a while. And I remember I got home that day and I just cried, and I called my mom and I was like, Mom, I can't do this. Everyone is so plugged in here. I can't, like, it was overwhelming just how much people, I guess going back to what I was saying before, of like how much people were like consumed. And it just felt like in numbing themselves to like, I don't know why it was like the headphones and like the phones, but I think I
feel like it's probably because you feel like you can't even approach and talk to someone because they're like, don't look at me.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear you, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
but yeah, it was overwhelming. I was like, oh man, I feel so, I just was so sad at like the reality of the world kind of, and like the state of the world. And I would say it definitely was like this kind of plummeting moment of like, whoa, God, where are you? Like, I can't see you right now. I can't hear you right now. Like, how can I go from like what I felt like I was living in a life that was like pretty close to how God designed it. I mean, it wasn't perfect by any means, but like I was living I just was radically changed after YWAM in so many ways. And my heart became alive. And I think with that, I became aware all of a sudden to sin in such a new way. And so that was really hard. And I felt like in a lot of ways, I felt like I think, get quiet about my experiences. It was really hard. It's always really hard, I think, to like capture what has been done in me or like what God does sometimes with words. And like, you come back from a trip or from like the mountains, like I was, and people are like, how was it? And I'm like, there's no way I remember my first summer, it was good. And I would have like my 5 stories on hand and like, I would tell about the summer and same with YWAM, which is like kind of the experiences or the stories I shared earlier, even today. But like, I have those stories in my head, but then when I like close my eyes and I remember like the way that like the waves looked when I would be having my quiet time in the morning and like the sun was rising behind them and like how close I felt God in the mornings when I would hear like the frogs still waking up, like or the way that I like get to see like campers just like encountering God in quiet, undistracted like beauty in the mountains for the first time for some ever, or even just sharing their testimonies with their friends who they've known forever. Or seeing people like accomplish like summiting a mountain, doing something they thought they never could do. And like the tears of joy behind that and like being able to like help them get there and believe in themselves. And yeah, even just like witnessing like healings, like that's crazy. How can I give words? Sometimes there's just no words for what God does. And I think it's been a journey of like, yeah, of learning how to share. And I think more as I'm getting older, I'm becoming more comfortable with the thought of like, it says like Mary like meditated and kept these things in her heart when she was, I think at the beginning of like Jesus's story with like the angels coming to her. And I just am like, there's going to be so many things that are just going to like people aren't going to understand. And I do my best because I do believe God's given me the stories that I have to share and to be like used for his glory and building his kingdom. But at the same time, like, I think I often, when I was younger, got caught up in like, oh, no one's ever going to understand it. I just want someone else to understand it. And like, that doesn't always have to be the case. And I'm becoming more comfortable with that. And like, it's not like a lonely thing. It's like, no, it's like actually really beautiful because the only person that needs to understand it does, because he was there with me. So, yeah, I don't know if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
that's really good. I remember what I wanted to ask you. Because we were talking about the suffering that doesn't always come with the fruit or the, quick perspective shift or, whatever. I was just going to ask you, because we were talking about the martyrs and obviously they die and then they don't see their fruit on this side of the life, but I'm sure they're reaping it. We know that from scripture. But I just wanted to get your perspective and maybe your encouragement for people who might be listening to this, and obviously us as well, of when you're in those seasons where, you're in the pit, you're sold into slavery, you're in prison. I want to get your perspective or your encouragement on for people who might be in the middle of the hard season, or they've chosen to do the hard thing. They thought the glory was going to come immediately and it just doesn't feel like it's there, or God feels far off. Like, what would you say to those people who are just caught in the midst of that?
That's good. Honestly, I kind of feel like I'm in one of those places right now myself, just with my job search and transition. But So I'm still learning too, but I like that you asked this question because I think even though I'm in it right now and it's taking on a new form in my life, I do like I have been in that place and I am in that place right now. Um, and something that I think about a lot in this season at least is um, a lot of times I think the enemy comes in like shouts and accusations and a lot of times, like, I would say my mind is more like hyperactive instead of like blank in times like this. And so, yeah, I think in my mind, at least in these hard times, it can a lot of like lies come at me. And I'm like, I don't know, dealing with thoughts of like, you're not good enough. Like, what do you think you're doing? Like, just like things that I know are like like accusations. And I would say what's helped me in these times is recognizing like you God usually comes in a gentle, soft, like still voice. And coming to learn and waiting on him to speak in these times can be the most like life-changing thing. I think for me, like it can be so quick and so small and so like hard to just sit still and listen in these times, but quite honestly like my like meditative or like listening prayer times have been super helpful in just like getting me through and reminding myself like I am not alone and God is with me, and he never comes to accuse us. He's so kind and gentle. And so that's what I would say is like prayer is huge. Like reading your Bible and prayer are like the two biggest tools I think that God gives us in these times, because he wants us to know we're not alone. And another thing is community, sharing with friends, being open about struggles and being honest with yourself and with others, and with God. Just honesty is huge, and this is something I'm dealing with right now. Like it's hard. It's a battle, but it's so worth it to push and to try and to fight. Using scripture, even when you don't feel like it, just getting up, doing everything that you can to lay distractions aside, read your Bible, just take even 5 minutes to just like silently listen to music and pray. Like those can be some of the biggest helpers. I think like God gives us a lot of tools to use. So yeah.
No, that's a 10 out of 10 answer. That's 12 out of 10. And you used language that actually comes from a story of somebody who was in this season with Elijah, where Elijah performs the miracle on Mount Carmel. Um, and it seems like it's going to be a time in Israel's history where like the tide has shifted, like the people are on God's side. We got rid of the prophets of Baal, and then all of a sudden the queen is like, I'm going to kill you, and Elijah runs in fear, wants to die, and God brings him to a mountain, and like that's where we get the wind and the fire and the earthquake, and then God's voice comes to him and says like, your work's not, there's a second half to the story, the work's not done. I think that's a perfect answer, because I think you're right. Like when we're on the adventure, um we see us getting through the adventure as like the finish line, like it's the peak, right? That's my goal. When I get there, everything is better, like all of that stuff. And I love how you're saying this. And this is like the antithesis of collapsing in on yourself, is this rest of like when you're in the prison, the pit, on the mountainside, running for your life, the best thing you can do is like sit still. And I love that part of that story is Elijah was forced to take a nap and eat, right? And get his strength back. Like it's very practical, but then there's also this very spiritual, like, hey, and we talked about this with Luke on our last episode, like God basically going, I'm the reward. I'm your portion, and like I am with you right now. So even though you're not seeing your outward circumstances change to according how you think they're going to, which they still might, like you can be full of joy and contentment right now because I'm here. And I like to juxtapose that against the accusation that you were feeling of, and we had our own private conversation about this, of it feels like the Lord's running ahead of me and I'm just chasing after him. Well, that's just not true. Like we know that God is with us, and yes, we're following him, but he's not like, wish you were faster, huh? Like,
Yeah.
like that's not what he's doing to us. Like he's leading us gently beside still waters. And even that psalm of, David's talking about like being near the valley of the shadow of death, but it's like there's still calm waters, there's still a green pasture. You just have to find it internally in the presence of God. So that's a fantastic answer.
That's good.
This makes me think of, just the whole topic of like the choice to do something hard, right? And I think, as I'm reading scripture more and realizing like the fact is God is in complete control of everything. And the one thing that he leaves up to us is our choice of how we respond to the situations. And if I think he's in complete control, then he's in complete control of all the situations, which means that where I am at this time is on purpose. And now I get to make a choice of whether I follow God, don't follow God, or follow him with a good or bad attitude, right? I think that's the other biggest part, is like, what is your attitude towards it? Because you could have been in those mountains the entire time going, God, this is stupid. I'm not a mountain climber. I don't belong here. One of these kids is going to get seriously injured, and it's going to be my fault because you brought me here and you know that I'm not a mountain climber. It's like, we all know those people that at 10 years old, they're climbing mountains. Why aren't they the ones here? It's like all those questions and stuff, and it's just an attitude. But I think when we make the choice to obey, to follow what God has for us, it just, and this is something I haven't experienced until recently when I've had to make these big choices of doing what God's told me. I was like, I don't really know why. I don't really understand where this is going to go, but I feel like you're calling me to do this, is like the term building your faith. And I didn't really understand that. I just thought it was like, building your faith means you just pray a lot and you read more minutes than you've read before. You've got a bigger worship playlist than you had last year. It's just like, that was my kind of understanding of like, oh, how much do you volunteer in your church? It's like those like very measurable things. And I think for me now, building my faith means every single time I say yes to God, I now have that written down in my personal history that I can look back on. And now when I'm facing a new challenge, a new choice, I can say, I did that one then. I'm still alive. I'm still doing okay. My family's okay. God showed up. Maybe I still don't see all the fruit of it, but it didn't fall apart and blow up in my face. And it wasn't like, and I think that is just, that for me personally has been such a huge, huge encouragement to like, even when I'm sitting here, like, what do I do, God? I don't know what the next step is. And like this stuff, like, is this the right path to go? And then I look back at those other situations when you do have hindsight and you go, oh, I can, when we get the privilege of seeing, that is so amazing. When like this just happened with me and Caleb, it was probably like 3 or 4 years ago. We had a time of prayer and I got a word from the Lord, and I have not seen anything from that. And it's been on my mind constant of like, God, why did you give me this word? Like, I don't really understand. Is that just a direction to go? Is it something that I won't see yet? Or is it something that I'm supposed to be doing and I've just missed it? It's all those questions. And then one of the guys we work with basically said a phrase that connected it in my brain. And I said, oh, now I get the connection. I see the arc. And it was just one of those moments where I was like, now I can trust that like God's been through all of it. It goes like this and it goes like that, but now I can see the through line. And so yeah, anyways, if you had any thoughts on like that building your faith kind of thing, because obviously you probably wouldn't have chosen the mountaineering job if you hadn't done YWAM, and it's like these like things that just keep building. And then when God asks even bigger questions, the ironic part of it is, I feel, and maybe you have a different experience, but I personally feel like the ironic part of it is that every time God asks you to do something and it gets bigger and bigger because you've grown in your faith and all these things, you can handle it. He knows you can handle it. You still are faced with that immediate, I don't want to do this. This is big and scary. And somehow that is the same amount of negative emotion as it is the first time he asks you to do something. But you look back at that first thing, you're like, that was nothing. Why was I
Yeah.
so scared about that? You know, it's like God asks you to like pray for some stranger for the first time and you're like, oh, this is crazy. I'm going to be so embarrassed. Like, and then you look back at that after you've prayed for more people and you're like, that was so easy. Like, why was I stressing? But that amount of like fear is still the same amount of fear when he's like, I want you to go back. And you're like, I've done it for a year. I know I can handle it. But all of a sudden you're like, I want it. Like how is the fear the same? You know, that's like so crazy. Yeah.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah, go
And
for
I
it.
think, I think I experienced this. Maybe a lot of people do. Is once you get to the mountain and then back down and you're at base camp, it's like I know I did it. I know I saw God move, but I don't want to do it again. And I think that's that
Yes.
like, oh, like there's this next challenge. Like I seen God do it. And I think that's the fear for me is like, God, like I already did the hard thing. Can I just chill for a second? And I think a lot of people experience that, and myself included. But I just want to add that little, like, because I feel that I think it's that fear, but then there's also this, like, I don't want to call it selfishness, but it is that I already did the hard thing. Can you ask somebody else?
It's just it's like a pushback. It's that flesh side of you that's like, I've done what I've done, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I did my piece. Can I be done now? You know?
Yeah. I know. I like how you said flesh because it was reminding me like that's our nature. Like our human nature is just kind of like, I'm good. I'll stay here. But yeah, as you were talking, I felt like I saw this picture of just like building, like adding bricks to a house or building something. And I don't know. I feel like that image of just crafting and building like so often, I think in our human nature, we want to just like quit or like, just be done. And it's hard to keep going. It is. But yeah, I like how you also brought in the concept of like the fear, kind of like that weight of it being the same over here as it was over here. I think it is helpful though. Like it is helpful to look back on your track record with God and being like, no, I have been faithful. I have done this with you before. And like I'm going to trust you again to come through again. And I think that like as God is like always, he's always every single day knocking on the doors of our hearts. And like I think as I journey with the Lord more, I'm starting to notice like if we had like spiritual eyes and ears to be able to pick up on like all the things that God wants to do on earth, like we would be floored with how often he speaks to us about even just like the person in the coffee shop or, the person that's holding the door open for you when you're going into the gym or whatever. It's like he wants to encounter people through us like all the time, every day. So it doesn't just have to be these mountaintop experiences, these like crazy adventures. I think that every single day is an adventure with God because he's always drawing more out of us. And I think too, to speak to your point, Caleb, of God, I just like, I'm tired. I think in this last season of figuring out my job, like dealing with a lot of big life questions. Do I want to move? Do I want to quit my job? I'm scared about like money security. I'm scared about all these things. And I just came back from this summer and like that was also, it was great, but I'm tired. Like I've felt so tired. And I think like kind of, I mean, I'd be curious your guys' thoughts on like all this too, but just like, when we're tired, is that like a sign of us like, because God gives us rest. He again, he equips us. Like he doesn't give us anything we can't handle. But I think like sometimes when I'm in this season when I've been like so tired and I'm like, Lord, I just want to rest with you. Like, I don't know, what are ways that like you can kind of be refueled into like, I don't know, continuing to be obedient to the Lord. Because that's what this all is. What we're talking about is like obedience, listening and obeying God. But yeah.
I've got some thoughts on that. So I've only read the first chapter, okay? But Caleb showed me the Atomic Habits book, and
Oh,
it's
yeah.
very cool. I've only read the first chapter, but basically his premise is that goal setting is not, you have systems, which is your habits and things you do every day, and then you have goals. And when you just chase after a goal, you build up all these systems to achieve the goal, but once you've achieved it, you say, yes, I did it. And then you fall all the way back to where you were before you set that goal. And so he said that's why you can run a marathon and then go back to never running ever again. And so the whole book is about like, how do you build systems and stuff? And I don't know, I haven't read it, but it just got me thinking about, I think a lot of times I look at my big achievements in my faith as goals. And then when I've completed them, which is like, I think a lot of people like do a missions trip and they're praying every day. They're relying on the Lord like crazy. Like your example, like every morning was an amazing devotional. And then the question is, okay, now that you're back home, you've obviously done that experience for an entire summer. Do you continue that? Right. And it's like, you have the option now too. You're not forced to like, you're like, if I don't do this today, I can't get through the day, which is like where you are in those really tough struggles where you're like, I'm relying on the Lord like crazy. And then when you get to a place that you don't feel like you have to rely on the Lord like crazy, does all of that go away, you know? And it's like, I don't know, I was thinking like missions trip. It's like you're praying and you're doing all this stuff. And then you come home, the same thing with the summer camp for youth students, like all this prayer, all this devotion, all this huge growth. And then you just fall straight back to where you were because like this book got me thinking, it's like, systems versus goals. And then you ask the question, which I'm like just throwing this question out entirely, but it's like, when have I reached it as a Christian? Right. And it's like, what's the end goal? And I'm thinking like, I don't think there is a goal. Like, I mean, there is a goal, right? Like perfect righteousness or something, but it's like, I need to just not even throw that out. That's my direction to go. But what's important is my daily system, because that gives me growth towards that over and over and over and over, instead of a one big push that's like, which is the missions trip thing or the summer camp thing where you then all of a sudden you're gone. But anyways, so that leads me to think, once you've done a big move for Christ and made big steps, gone out in big faith, and then after it's all over, then I think we instinctively think I've completed the goal. And then all of that work is part of that goal, and then now gets put on the shelf and says, this was this project and we completed it and we can look at it and isn't it beautiful? You know,
Yeah.
And then now we're back to regular life. And it's like, what if that, and I think that's why you might feel, and I agree with this feel of like, can I sit back and rest now? I've completed the goal. And I think the obedience part of it that you said is like, all we have to do is be obedient, is like, that's the daily 1% more over a lifespan is thousands of percent more. And it's like, but we look at I completed my goal 100%. I'm 100% better as a Christian than I was last year. You know, it's like, anyways, yeah, it just got me thinking about that. And I think too, that's another thought I had about like, where do you get like recharge from rest? Because I feel that a lot too, where it's, when you just talk about like people working and you're just putting in the grind and you just kind of feel like you're asleep and you're numb and you're tired. And I think my experience this weekend was, I came in and I was like, I came in tired, right? I was like, I've been working hard. It was a lot to get down here to do this. And then seeing like just the scope of work to be done, and then being alongside people that were like, we're tired, but we have to go. Like, we're not stopping, because if I stop, then these children that need to be rescued don't get rescued, or at least the process is slowed, you know, and like just that huge scope of like, you climb the mountain and you're like, I need a break. And they're going, dude, this is one peak of 50. And then, but like not in an overwhelming way, but in like, I can put my like tiredness aside, you know, just that kind of like, we've won the battle, but there's a war going on. And it's like, there's two ways to react to that. You say, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. Like, this is too much. And maybe the answer to it is community. Is you need people around you that go, dude, let's go. Like, we're all tired, but we're all fighting. And it just like, you know, I don't know, just it gets you fired up. And I think that pushes past so much of I can put aside me feeling tired. Like, and that's where sometimes the Lord like fills you up and you're not tired and you're like fired up and ready to go and energized. And I think there's a beautiful like peaceful, energetic feeling that comes from like good times of worship and times of devotion, like all this stuff. But I also feel like there's just another part of it that's, Jesus is like spent all morning praying and then he's just fired up to do ministry all day. And I'm sure his body was tired, but he's like, another one. I'm okay being tired. It's like, a quote that comes to mind is when we shot a project with Luke Eaton where he was training for 30 for Freedom. And he said, the situation that these people are in is so bad that I can put up with my difficulty of being tired, being worn out and training if that helps them. Like I will gladly make that trade. And I think that also just helps me think like, okay, what I'm doing, the work I'm putting in, I can be tired, I can be miserable, but if I'm making a successful trade into the kingdom of God that's helping other people, it's like, then it's worth it, And I think, it's the same with especially with me, with Sebastian, who's about to turn 2 years old, but it's that whole like, I'm tired. I want time to myself. I haven't had an evening to just relax in a while, like all that stuff. But it's like, oh, but I'm making that trade into serving him because he's 1 year old. Like there's a lot of things he probably wants to do that he doesn't get to do because he doesn't know how to talk. He's not tall enough. He's not, like all these things. And it's like, he hasn't developed the skills for it. So like, I'm going to serve him and know that like I'm growing and pouring into his life and like always I'll make that trade, So anyways, those are my thoughts on like that stuff.
I had some things here. What you're talking about with like putting the goals up on the shelf, that made me think of our conversation about, we talked about putting our accomplishments on our belt, and I didn't even like this just add to that thought of, I think that's what we should do as Christians, of when we do things for the Lord and we're building our faith and we've seen him move and we have these testimonies or these accomplishments or these awards or whatever. I think that's for us to put on our belt and keep moving rather than putting on the mantle and sitting in the recliner and being like, look what I did, or look what God did. And it's like, no, how do those things contribute to the path forward? And I think those things can give you the peace you need to continue moving forward and give you the confidence you need in the Lord and in your own abilities that he's given you to keep moving forward. And then the other thing I was thinking about was, and I think I shared this in our last podcast, I'll share it again here. It was a really long time ago, but I think there was a really big movement of in the Christian world, I would say, of the whole idea of like resting in Jesus, and like the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry was a big book, and I haven't read it, so I have no thoughts on that. But I think a lot of people were in this space of like, God wants rest for me and I don't want to burn out, which are both true statements. But I think how we approach those things, it turned into, if I'm ever feeling tired, I must be in the wrong place. And it's like, the story I want to share is, Jesus gets his disciples ready to go out and do ministry on their own. And then he sends out the 12 disciples and they go town to town and share the gospel. They're traveling, they're in ministry. And as we all know, is like when you're going on those type of trips, those mission trips, those specific things, it's like there isn't a lot of time for rest, mostly because you're not sleeping in your own bed. So like that just like takes away that whole like comfort of like getting a good night's sleep, basically, on that level. And then it builds on it of you're talking to people all day, like they're dealing with demons, sick people, preaching the gospel. Jesus says that they're going to go to towns that are going to reject them, so they're not even going to be able to stay. They just have to wipe up the dust off their feet and go to the next one. So they're on this missionary journey, this missions trip, right? While that's happening, John the Baptist gets killed in prison. So Jesus is sad. He's tired. And the disciples come back and he says like, hey, let's go off by ourselves to rest. Like, I'm sure he's going to want to unpack like what's going on. Like, let's go to a secluded place. So they get in the boat, they get to the other side, and a huge crowd of thousands of people are waiting there. And what is recorded about Jesus? It says he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And I was thinking about what you were saying there of like, there's people in the world who need our help. And instead of getting his time to rest, he preaches all day, he heals, he ministers. The disciples are like, bro, it's time for that vacation you're talking about. Send them away, please. They need to eat. It's just an excuse. Like, Just send them away. And then Jesus goes, you feed them. Oh, okay. But Jesus, I'm burnt out. Like, so
Yeah.
Jesus does the miracle, but there's still work to do. Have you guys ever been in a room with 5 to 10,000 people? It's not a small room. What does Jesus have them do? Usher them. Put them in groups of 50. You know how long that probably took? And then serve them. I've worked in busy restaurants before. I've never worked in a restaurant of 10,000 people.
10,000
Yeah.
Right? So they do that. It's the end of the day. What does Jesus say? Okay, make camp. Let's rest. No, Jesus looks at the sky, sees a storm coming, says, get in the boat. You're going without me. They're probably at this point like, we just went on this missions trip. We just spent all day ministering. We just spent so long serving food. Now you want us to get in the boat and go to the other side? Jesus goes off and prays by himself. They get in the boat. The storm comes. Now we get the famous story of Jesus walking on water. And it adds a specific detail of that they had to row the boat because the wind was against them. Okay. Jesus walks on water, calms the storm. They get to the other side. Guess who's waiting for them? More people. And they do ministry from there. So we got like, from what we can tell just from this story, like 2 full days of ministry on the back of Jesus' cousin getting murdered and the disciples coming back from a missions trip, and they are just going. And the reason I share all of that is to say, I don't think that's like sustainable. Like God's not asking us to do that 365 for 40 years, but there will be times in your life where for a summer that you're climbing up and down a mountain for 2 months straight. And that is such a God ordained thing. Like that, those are seasons that we have to be able to learn how to rest on the run, which sounds like an oxymoron, but I think that's part of coming all the way back to the beginning of the conversation of that's why it's hard. Like the reason it's hard is because you are going to be tired. You are going to be worn out, but God has something for you to do through you, to do in you, to do for the people around you. And I think it's up to us to have that discernment and that listening and that obedience that in those moments that we're going like, I'm relying on you. I need your power to do this. But then we also need to get on the other side of those things. And like you're saying, Zach, of like, what did we learn within that season that we're now bringing into the other side? What's that system? And it's like, even if I'm not tired and I'm not worn out, that should mean I should have more energy for the ministry of the gospel, right? Or for God to minister to me. And I think those are the things that it's like, especially for me, when it's like, when I look at that 2-day period of running hard and like, I just want to get to the other side, what my rest will turn into is a devolvement of the systems that I had in place, because it's like, I earn this. I deserve this. Look, it's there on the mantle. What's 1 day of not reading my Bible? What's 2 days without praying? What's 3 days? Like God, like I went through that 5-year period of my mountain. I was struggling every day. Now, like I deserve to have a 5 years of just chilling. And one, I'm miserable in that, or I learned I was miserable. Like that's not what I was created for. And 2, there's no growth in those seasons. So that was a lot, but I think that is like, I think people need to hear that there will be seasons of you're just going hard. And I don't think it has to result in burnout if you have those correct systems in place.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to say, it reminds me of the verse where I don't think it's, I think it is Jesus that says, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And it, as you were talking, like my life, our lives are not our own. Like we are, as soon as we give our lives to Jesus, we are like, the symbol of our faith is literally a cross. Like we are dying to ourselves, to our flesh, to our selfishness, to our human nature, and we are becoming servants. We are becoming servants because that's the King that we follow. And yeah, I guess that's kind of like that's what I was reminded of as you were talking, and kind of you too, Zach, as like we are servants, and like it's up to us every day if we want to choose to continue to be servants or not. So yeah, so good, you guys.
I'll add one final thought here. I think the way I'm like thinking about this is when we do hard things for God and he asks us to go and do all these crazy things, go on mission trips and volunteer or just pray for people. I think the way to look at it is not like this is an assignment that I'm going to go and accomplish and now I can look at it. I think if we look at everything that is difficult and hard as like training, and if you look at it in a way that's like, okay, God has this thing that he's going to do in 10 years from now. Here's the 5 things I need to learn in these next 10 years to accomplish this thing. I need to learn how to pray every day in the mountains without any distractions. What's the best way to accomplish that? It's like, and then if you go through that thinking, God's going to teach me how to do, and that's where I'm at right now with like a bunch of stuff where it's like, I don't really know exactly what I'm learning through it, but if I think of it as like, this is a training session, and it's like, I'm going to walk out of this with a new skill set or a new tool. And like, that's the thought process. Then I think that, because then it's like, I'm adding something to my abilities rather than I've accomplished something and I'm glad I never have to do that again, But I'm just thinking like, yeah, if I was somebody who had a bunch of people under me and I was like, okay, I need someone to do this job and you need training in it. So I'm going to send you here to get your training and then you'll come back and we can do this next thing. But it's like, you go through the training and the training's over, but now you use those skills. You don't just say, oh, I'm glad that training's over,
Yeah, that's
but
so good.
anyways, yeah, that was my last thought.
That's a good way to look at it. Any final thoughts, Sophie?
Yeah, I think like we're so quick to make it all about ourselves, and I think trusting the Lord, it's an everyday thing, and it's gonna be up and down, and it's gonna be full of storms and sunny days and adventures and mundane days, and just make the choice to be with him through it all. That's my last thought.
That's good. Awesome. Good stuff.
All right. Thanks for coming down. We'll definitely have you back. Love you guys. See ya.
See ya.